The Silent Plea. The colony of Vera had once been a place of peace where the rivers glowed under the twin suns and the people sang songs in the wide fields of crystal grass. They were not warriors or conquerors, but builders and dreamers. They carved homes in the cliffs and raised towers that shone like glass, proud of the harmony they had built with the land. For generations they had known nothing but safety, because they trusted the great galactic council. The council promised order, fairness, and protection, and the Verans believed those promises. They were wrong. The warlords came in black ships that tore through the sky like blades. They did not come to talk, nor did they come to trade. They came to take. The ground shook when their machines landed, and the air filled with fire as they burned the crystal fields. Those who resisted were cut down, and those who fled were chained. The warlords had no interest in peace, only in power, and Vera was rich with resources that glittered in the soil. The invaders stripped the mines, emptied the storehouses, and forced the people to work under endless cruelty. Families were broken. The songs of the fields replaced by the screams of the enslaved. In the beginning, the Verans still had hope. They had sent their plea to the Galactic Council, certain their distress call would be heard. The council had fleets, armies, and power enough to stop any warlord. Surely, they thought, the council would answer. So they waited. They prayed. Each night they looked to the skies for ships of salvation. None came. Weeks turned into months, and the invaders grew bolder. Villages were erased, temples shattered, and children taken as trophies. The Verans whispered that perhaps their cries had been lost in the endless noise of the galaxy. Yet others feared something worse, that their cries had been heard and ignored. Whispers spread in the shadows that the council did not care for small colonies, that their lives were measured as less than nothing in the grand stage of galactic politics. Such thoughts were painful, but with each passing day they felt more true. One elder named Rethan still clung to belief. He was a scholar, bent with age, who had studied the ancient records stored in the great library of Vera. As he watched his people suffer. He turned again and again to those records, searching for a story, a sign, anything that might guide them. One night he spoke to the young workers in hushed tones. He told them of myths from the far edges of the archives, stories of a species from a harsh world called Earth. According to the texts, they were a people forged in endless struggle, a people who thrived in conditions that would kill others. They were hunters, fighters, survivors. Some called them predators, others called them monsters, but always the stories spoke of their strength. Most laughed at the tales. Humanity was a name from another age, a forgotten race said to have burned itself out long before the Verans built their shining towers. Yet Rethan's eyes burned with conviction as he spoke. He said that even if they were myths, myths carried power, and in the darkest times hope itself could be a weapon. Some of the young ones listened. They began to whisper of Earth, of warriors, who might come. They whispered not because they truly believed, but because it gave them the strength to rise the next morning and endure another day. But in the silence of the nights, far beyond Vera, a signal did travel. It was not clean or strong, broken by interference and static. It was a cry of pain and desperation, a call that said simply that a people were dying. It moved across the void, past stars and dust, past the borders of the council, past the reach of the warlords, until at last it touched something old and hidden, somewhere, on a world scarred by wars of its own. The signal was received. Men and women listened in silence, their faces hard. They knew the council would do nothing, for they had learned long ago that the galaxy looked upon them with fear and suspicion. But they also knew the meaning of slavery and the taste of oppression. The Verans did not know it yet. They still cried under the shadow of the warlords, still bent their backs in the mines and wept for lost children. They still cursed the council that turned its eyes away. They did not know that beyond the stars a new chapter was beginning, and though they felt abandoned and forgotten, their cry had been heard. The warriors of Earth were stirring. The councils, Betrayal, the Galactic Council sat in a vast chamber that stretched higher than the tallest mountains of Vera. Light poured down from crystal domes, reflecting on polished floors and towering banners of countless empires. Delegates from every corner of the galaxy filled the seats, their voices weaving together in a low murmur of debate. At the center, the plea from Vera glowed on a display, a message of fire and desperation, a cry for help that had crossed the stars. The words were simple yet heavy with sorrow. The people begged for salvation, for soldiers, for anyone who might drive away the invaders that chained their children. Some delegates shifted uncomfortably, others muttered about protocol and precedent. A few voices spoke with genuine concern, saying that the council was built on the promise of unity, that no world should ever be left to suffer alone. But those voices were quickly drowned by louder ones. The counselors of the great powers rose, in their seats, their robes shimmering with wealth, their eyes cold. They argued that Vera was a small colony, barely a speck compared to the mighty core worlds. They argued that sending fleets to protect such a place would cost too much and bring too little gain. Some claimed the warlords were not even there. Concern that they existed outside council law, and to fight them would risk wider war. One tall counselor, his skin gleaming silver, spoke with a voice that echoed across the chamber. He declared that the galaxy was too large to save every colony, and if the council tried, it would collapse under the weight of endless cries. He said sacrifices must be made for stability, and Vera must be one of those sacrifices. The words chilled the chamber, yet many nodded. Stability meant profit, and profit meant power, and none wished to risk either for a forgotten people on the edge of nowhere. When the vote was called, the result was swift. A resolution was passed that declared Vera's plea acknowledged but outside the scope of intervention. The council would send no fleets, no soldiers, not even a warning to the warlords. Instead, they sent a carefully worded statement of regret, offering only the empty comfort of sympathy while doing nothing to end the suffering. To the council, it was finished. They turned to other matters, to trade disputes and border negotiations, their voices rising in endless debate as if the cries of the dying meant less than dust beneath their feet. On Vera, the people waited. They watched the skies each night, hoping to see the white gleam of council ships arriving to drive away their oppressors. They whispered to their children that help was on the way. But days turned into weeks, and still no one came. At last, the truth reached them. A message was broadcast through smuggler channels whispered by traders who had overheard fragments of the council's debate. The truth spread like poison. The council had refused them. The council had abandoned them. The weight of betrayal crushed the people as much as the chains on their wrists. Some fell into despair, refusing to rise from the mines, their eyes hollow. Others raged in secret, their anger burning hotter than the fires of the furnaces they were forced to stoke. Hope, once fragile but alive, now shattered into dust. Even Elder Rethan, who had spoken of ancient warriors from Earth, felt the ground shake beneath his faith. If the council would not act, what chance did myths have against the iron grip of the warlords? The warlords themselves laughed when they heard of the council's decision. They strutted through the streets of conquered towns, proclaiming that no one would come, that no one dared challenge their rule. They forced the Verans to kneel before them, mocking the very pleas that had gone unanswered. They declared that the galaxy itself had chosen them as masters, that the council's silence was proof of their right to rule. With each passing day, their cruelty grew bolder, their punishments harsher, their grip stronger. And yet in the darkness, the whispers did not die. Among the young, among those who still remembered Rathan's words, the myth of Earth began to grow. It was no longer spoken as a story, but as a prayer. If the council would not come, perhaps the forgotten warriors of a death world would. Perhaps there was still a chance. Faint as the light of a star, barely seen, the oppressed clung to that hope not because they truly believed, but because without it they would break completely. Far away, on the scarred surface of Earth, the signal from Vera continued to echo. It had not been ignored, not by those who carried the memory of chains on their own backs. In quiet war rooms and hidden hangars, preparations began. The council might have turned away, but Earth had heard. The Verans did not know it yet. They only felt the pain of betrayal and the crushing silence of the galaxy that had abandoned them. But in that silence, something was moving, and the warlords who mocked the stars would soon learn that they had not been left unchallenged. The warriors of Earth were rising. A world called Earthfar, beyond the reach of the Council, hidden among the silent arms of the galaxy, a blue and scarred planet turned slowly beneath its sun. This was Earth, a world that many in the galaxy believed to be empty, forgotten, or destroyed long ago. Yet the truth was very different. Humanity still lived, hardened by centuries of struggle, carrying the weight of endless wars and the memory of countless losses. They had fought themselves, they had fought the environment of their brutal homeworld, and they had survived it all. Where others would have fallen into extinction, humans endured, and through endurance they grew strong. The signal from Vera reached Earth in fragments, broken by distance and interference. But it was enough. It carried the tone of despair, the voice of a people who had lost all hope. In the underground command bunkers of Earth, men and women gathered to listen. Their faces were grim, their eyes filled with something deeper than anger. They understood the meaning of that cry better than any other species could. Humanity had known oppression. Humanity had once begged for help and found none. They had been laughed at, isolated, and forgotten by the wider galaxy. Now they heard the same cruelty repeated against another people, and they could not remain silent. Commanders spoke with voices like iron as they recalled the lessons of history. No council would intervene. No empire would risk its wealth for strangers. If the Vayrans were to be saved, it would not be through politics or words. It would be through fire and steel. The decision was made not by vote, but by instinct, as natural as the heartbeat. Earth would answer. Preparation began at once. In vast hangars carved beneath mountains, old warships were awakened. They were not elegant like the vessels of the Council, nor adorned with banners like the fleets of the empires. They were built for one purpose: to survive and to kill. Their hulls bore scars from ancient battles, their engines roared with thunder, and their weapons gleamed with the promise of destruction. Crews moved with purpose, repairing, arming, and preparing for war. Every man and woman who stepped aboard, those ships carried with them the memory of pain and the vow that no one else would suffer as they had. Among the ranks were veterans with eyes hardened by decades of battle, and young recruits whose spirits burned with fierce resolve. They trained side by side, sharpening their blades, checking their rifles, running drills until sweat poured like rain. Commanders drilled into them that this mission was more than a rescue. It was a message to the galaxy. Humanity had been forgotten, treated as nothing, yet here they were, ready to cross the stars, not for conquest, not for profit, but for justice. The people of Earth gathered in cities and towns, watching as the skies filled with the thunder of rising ships. Families said their farewells, proud yet fearful, knowing that those who went might not return. Children waved flags as colossal carriers ascended into the clouds, their hulls shining with the fire of engines. The old whispered prayers for victory, while the young dreamed of glory. It was a sight not seen for generations, a world united, not by greed but by the call of honor. At the heart of the fleet stood the flagship, a colossal vessel known simply as the Iron Spear. It was a ship built from the bones of fallen machines, a monster of steel and fury. On its bridge stood Commander Arik Dane, a man whose name was spoken with both respect and fear. His face was scarred, his voice steady, his gaze sharp as a blade. He had fought in wars where humanity had been pushed to the edge of extinction, and he had clawed them back from the abyss. Now he prepared to lead them into the stars once more. The signal from Vera played one last time on the bridge. The broken voice of a desperate people echoed across the chamber, and silence followed. Dane looked to his crew, his soldiers, his warriors. He spoke no long speech, for none was needed. He simply told them that they were the sword of Earth, and that they would show the galaxy that no people should be left to die in chains. His words struck deep into every heart. Engines flared to life, weapons hummed with power, and one by one the warships of Earth lifted into the void. In the silence, of space, the fleet formed ranks. Rows of steel giants stretched across the stars, their guns ready, their hearts burning. Humanity, forgotten and underestimated, now rose again. The galaxy did not know it yet, but the age of indifference was ending. The warriors of Earth were coming, and nothing would stop them. Warriors among the stars, the fleet of Earth pushed into the void with a silence that was heavier than thunder. Engines glowed with white fire as ship after ship left orbit, forming a spear that pointed toward the stars. From every viewport, the soldiers of Earth could see their home shrinking behind them, the blue and green of their world fading into a speck of light. None turned back. Every man and woman aboard those warships knew that the path ahead would lead them into danger, yet not one questioned the decision. Humanity had been forgotten and dismissed by the galaxy, but now they would carve their name into the darkness with steel and sacrifice. On the flagship Iron Spear, Commander Eric Dane stood at the bridge, watching the endless spread of stars unfold. His officers moved quickly around him, checking coordinates, monitoring engines, and arming weapons. Every one of them carried scars of battles fought on Earth, and every one of them understood the weight of the mission. They were not only going to fight for the Vayrans, but also to prove that humanity would no longer remain in the shadows. Messages whispered through the fleet, carried in quiet voices across the decks. Old stories of Earth's resilience were spoken again, not as myths but as truth. They told of soldiers who had stood against impossible odds, of men and women who had faced enemies greater in number and stronger in power, and yet had refused to bow. The young recruits listened, their eyes burning with resolve, while the veterans nodded in silence, for they had lived those stories. The journey to Vera was long, but the fleet did not waste time. Drills were constant, weapons were tested, and simulations of combat filled the training decks. Humanity was preparing not for a symbolic gesture, but for total war. The warlords would not expect such fury, for they believed Earth to be weak, a forgotten world with nothing to offer. Soon, they would learn the truth. Meanwhile, on Vera, the people continued to suffer under the lash of their captors. The warlords grew arrogant, strutting through the streets as if they were gods. They forced the Vayrans to work until their hands bled, to bow until their backs broke. Every whisper of rebellion was crushed with cruelty, and every plea for mercy was met with laughter. The slaves prayed for an end, but even prayer seemed hollow when the sky remained empty. Yet a few still remembered the old scholar Rethan and his stories of humans. They clung to those words in silence, not knowing that beyond the horizon of stars their hope was about to take form. At last, the fleet of Earth reached the outer edge of the Veyran system. The Iron Spear led the way, her massive frame cutting through the dark like a blade. The warlords had stationed patrol ships to guard the system, but they were unprepared for what came. The first contact was swift and merciless. The patrol ships moved to intercept, mocking the crude design of the human vessels. But when the guns of Earth opened fire, the mocking ended. Beams of searing energy and missiles tipped with brutal warheads tore through the enemy ships, ripping them apart in explosions that lit the void. What should have been a skirmish turned into a slaughter, and the patrol fleet was erased in minutes. The news of the battle spread quickly across the system. The warlords laughed at first, believing it was a mistake or an accident, but soon more reports arrived. More ships destroyed, more fleets shattered, all by an enemy they had never faced before. Fear began to creep into their voices as they realized these were not council vessels, not any empire they knew, but something else entirely. On Vera, the enslaved watched the skies. At first they thought the lights were falling stars, but soon the shapes grew clear. Colossal ships burned through the atmosphere, their engines roaring like storms. The ground shook as shadows passed over villages and mines, and the people looked upward with wide eyes. For the first time since the invasion, the warlords faltered. They shouted orders and scrambled to prepare defenses, but the fear in their eyes betrayed them. From the Iron Spear, Commander Dane gave the order. Dropships launched from the human carriers, black and silver crafts that cut through the air and opened like the jaws of predators. Warriors of Earth poured from them, armored, armed, and unyielding. Their boots thundered against the soil of Vera as they advanced, rifles blazing, blades ready. The Verans, chained and beaten, gasped in disbelief as they saw the impossible come true. The warriors of Earth had fallen from the sky, not as myths, not as legends, but as flesh and blood. The first clash on the ground was brutal. Human soldiers struck with precision, their movements honed by endless training, their fury sharpened by generations of hardship. The warlords who had mocked the cries of Vera now faced an enemy they could not understand. Humanity fought not for conquest but for liberation, and in their eyes burned a fire that no chain could break. The galaxy had turned its back, but Earth had not. The first clash, the warlords had always believed themselves untouchable. For years they had crushed weaker worlds and bent their people to chains without facing any true resistance. But when the warriors of Earth descended upon Vera, the illusion of their invincibility shattered. The first clash was not fought in quiet shadows but in fire and thunder that shook the very soil. Human dropships landed across the scarred plains, doors slamming open as soldiers poured out with rifles raised and armor gleaming. Their boots struck the ground like drums of war, and their voices carried the harsh tones of command. They moved, in tight formations covering each other with practiced precision, and every step forward felt like the march of an unstoppable tide. The warlord soldiers rushed to meet them, armored in jagged plates and roaring with cruelty. They charged with numbers that outmatched the human landing parties, confident that sheer force would break the intruders. But they had never faced Earth's way of war. The humans did not scatter or retreat. They stood their ground and unleashed, a storm of fire that tore into the charging lines. Bullets and energy beams ripped through enemy ranks, dropping bodies into the dust. Where other armies might have broken under the rush of larger forces, humanity advanced into it, their rifles never pausing, their blades ready for those who came too close. The clash turned into chaos as the enemy realized the humans would not yield. Combat fell into brutal close quarters where blades struck against armor and fists broke bones. Human soldiers fought like predators, their strikes fueled by muscle memory and instincts carved from centuries of conflict. Every move was decisive, every action carried weight, and though the warlord soldiers were larger and stronger, they found themselves faltering against opponents who refused to give ground. For every human that fell, 3 of the enemy were cut down, and for every warlord that raised his weapon, a human was already waiting with fire and steel. From the mines and broken villages, the enslaved Verans watched in awe. They had been told, their cries meant nothing, that the galaxy had abandoned them, but now they saw strangers from a forgotten world driving back the monsters who had ruled their lives. Chains rattled as they turned to each other with wide eyes. Whispers spread quickly, whispers that grew into shouts, shouts that turned into courage. Some of the Verans, desperate for freedom, picked up tools, rocks, even broken chains and struck out against their captors. Their rebellion was small, scattered, but it mattered. For the first time, the people of Vera felt the spark of hope ignite within their hearts. The warlords raged at this defiance. They poured more troops into the battle, filling the skies with ships and dropping reinforcements across the plains. Explosions lit the air, shaking the ground as fire rained down. Yet the humans did not falter. Commanders barked orders through, the roar of combat, shifting formations, directing fire, and adapting to every move. This was where humanity thrived, in the heart of chaos where survival meant quick thought and relentless courage. The enemy outnumbered them, but humans had always been outnumbered on their brutal homeworld. They had learned to turn weakness into strength, to fight not with sheer power but with cunning and will. Commander Dane stood at the front lines with his soldiers, his rifle blazing as he cut through the warlord troops. His voice rang out above the noise, steady and commanding, giving strength to those around him. He had no need for grand speeches. His presence was enough, for he fought alongside his warriors as one of them, bleeding as they bled, killing as they killed. To the Verans who saw him, he seemed like a figure from legend, a man who had stepped out of the stories told by Elder Rethan. The battle raged for hours, neither side willing to yield. The plains became a graveyard of broken machines and fallen warriors, smoke rising into the sky like a black banner. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the outcome became clear. The warlords had thrown everything into the clash, yet the humans still stood battered but unbroken, their lines unbroken, their fire unending. Every charge had been repelled, every ambush crushed, every trap undone. When darkness finally fell, the warlords pulled back, their forces shattered, their pride bleeding into the soil. The humans stood over the field of ruin, weary yet undefeated. They had proven in blood what the Council had refused to believe. Earth was not weak, not forgotten, and not broken. They were warriors who carried with them the fury of survival and the unyielding will of a world that had forged them in fire. The Vayrans fell to their knees, not in despair, but in reverence. For the first time since the invasion began, they believed freedom was possible. The warriors of Earth had come from the sky, and in their coming the tide of the war had begun to turn. Blood and brotherhood. The night air over the battlefield was thick with smoke and the copper scent of blood, but the humans did not rest. Even as the warlords withdrew their broken forces, the soldiers of Earth moved among the wounded and the fallen, dragging their comrades to safety and tending to the injured with hands that had known both destruction and mercy. Commander Dane walked among them, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of a counterattack. He knew the warlords would not give up so easily, and that each moment of reprieve was precious but fragile. The Vayrans had begun to gather around, the humans, their faces etched with awe and fear, yet also with a new kind of hope. They watched as the soldiers shared rations and bandaged wounds without asking for thanks or rewards. They watched as the humans spoke in quiet tones, teaching them how to fight and how to survive. And they began to understand that these warriors from a distant blue world were not like the conquerors who had enslaved them. In the makeshift camp, the humans established, fires flickered against the night sky, casting long shadows over the cracked earth and broken weapons. Soldiers exchanged stories in low voices, recounting battles fought on distant worlds, training exercises that had prepared them for exactly this kind of chaos, and memories of home that kept their hearts beating with a stubborn defiance. There was laughter too, sharp and brief, cutting through the tension, reminding everyone that they were still alive and still human. The bond between them grew stronger with each shared moment, each shared risk, and each act of courage. This was more than a military unit. It was a brotherhood forged in blood and fire, tested under the harshest conditions, and proving unbreakable. Dane knelt beside a young soldier named Callan, whose arm was torn and bleeding from a collision with a warlord soldier. He applied the bandages carefully, speaking words of reassurance that carried the weight of experience. Callan's eyes met his, and for the first time that day he smiled, weak but genuine, knowing that he had survived because of the man beside him and the people he had fought alongside. Around the camp, others were doing the same, forming small groups to share knowledge and cover each other's weaknesses. Even the Vayrans were learning quickly, picking up rifles and improvised weapons, mimicking the humans' formations and beginning to feel a taste of the power they had been denied for so long. But even in the quiet, the threat of the warlords lingered. Scouts returned with reports of incoming patrols and reinforcements moving across the hills, their numbers growing with each passing hour. The humans did not flinch. They began to plan, mapping out strategies, sharing intelligence and coordinating, with the Vayrans who had begun to trust them. Each plan was precise, each detail accounted for, and each decision made with the understanding that hesitation could mean death. The humans had faced impossible odds before, and they knew that survival demanded both courage and clarity, a combination the warlords could never anticipate, because they had never faced a people who would fight as one against overwhelming power. By dawn, the camp was ready for the next strike. Humans and Vayrans moved together in coordinated sweeps, setting traps, establishing ambush points, and reinforcing positions that would hold the enemy at bay. Each human soldier carried the weight of his own experiences, the pain of losses endured, and the fire of determination that would not allow defeat. Dane watched from a ridge as the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon, illuminating the plains where the next battle would unfold. He knew that what awaited them would be brutal, that blood would again stain the earth, and that the warlords would not relent. But he also knew something far more important. Humanity had brought hope to this broken world, and that hope was more powerful than any weapon the enemy could wield. As the humans moved into position, the Varans followed, hesitant, at first but then with growing confidence. Together they formed lines, a strange and powerful union that neither the warlords nor the galaxy had ever expected. Dane's voice rose above the preparation, calm but resolute, speaking words that carried across the camp and into the hearts of every soldier and every freed Varan. They were ready to fight not just for survival but for freedom, for justice, and for a future that had seemed impossible until now. In that moment, amid the smoke, fire, and rising sun, the true power of humanity became clear. It was not just in their weapons or their strategy, but in their courage, their unity, and the unbreakable bond they forged with those they came to protect. The warriors from Earth had become more than liberators. They had become brothers in blood and spirit. And together they would face whatever darkness the galaxy could throw at them. The last stand. The battlefield stretched out before them like a dark canvas, scarred and smoking from the fights that had come before, and yet ready for the final confrontation that would decide the fate of the Varans and the galaxy itself. The humans stood at the forefront, their armor scorched, their weapons chipped, and their bodies weary but their spirits burning brighter than ever. Commander Dane raised his hand, and the soldiers and Varans alike fell silent, listening to the calm but commanding tone that had guided them through impossible battles before the warlords had amassed their largest force yet. A living wall of hatred and power that stretched to the horizon, but the humans did not flinch. Their eyes gleamed with determination, and their hearts beat with the knowledge that they had faced extinction before and had refused to bow. The Varans looked at them with awe, their fear replaced with a strange mixture of trust and admiration. They had seen what humanity could endure, and how they could rise from every fall stronger than before. The first volley of energy blasts tore across the plain, but the humans were ready, ducking and rolling through craters and broken ground. They advanced with precision, their weapons finding targets with deadly accuracy. The Varans followed, inspired by the humans' courage and tactics, moving with newfound skill that surprised even themselves. Explosions rocked the earth, but the humans pressed on, their strategy flawless, their teamwork a testament to years of discipline and experience. Every shot fired was calculated, every maneuver deliberate, and every human soldier knew that failure was not an option. Dane led the charge through the center of the enemy formation, his presence a rallying point for everyone around him. The warlord generals had never seen warriors like these. Their speed, adaptability, and unyielding focus unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. They struck with overwhelming force, breaking lines and creating chaos among the enemy ranks. The Varans took advantage of every opening, turning the tide in ways that no one had believed possible. But it was not just the humans' skill that won battles. It was their courage, their willingness to risk everything for others, and the bond they had formed with the Varans made them unstoppable. Hours passed, yet neither side gave ground. The sun rose higher, turning the battlefield into a harsh, blazing arena where sweat and blood mixed with smoke and fire. Humans carried their wounded and continued to fight, their energy seemingly endless. Their morale never faltered because they were fighting for more than victory. They were fighting for freedom, for hope, and for the promise that no one would be left behind. Dane found himself face to face with the warlord commander, a massive being of strength and brutality, whose attacks had felled countless opponents. The clash was brutal, each strike shaking the ground and sending echoes across the battlefield. But Dane did not hesitate. He moved with precision, striking where the warlord least expected, and every strike carried the weight of humanity's resolve. Finally, the warlord commander fell, his army disoriented and leaderless. The humans and Varans surged forward together, overwhelming the remaining forces with unmatched ferocity. The battlefield fell silent except for the groans of the wounded and the crackling of dying fires. Humans raised their weapons high, not in triumph but in solidarity, having shown the galaxy that courage and unity could overcome any odds. The Varans wept openly, some embracing their saviors, and others staring in disbelief at the warriors who had fallen from the sky to change their fate forever. Dane looked across the field, seeing the cost but also the victory. Humanity had not only survived but had rewritten the story of a world that had been lost to fear and oppression. The soldiers of Earth had proven that no army was too great, and no enemy too fierce when faced with courage, strategy, and unity. Together with the Vayrons, they began rebuilding what had been destroyed, teaching, sharing, and ensuring that the darkness would never return. The warlords were defeated, but the legend of the humans would live on, a tale told, across galaxies of warriors who refused to surrender, and whose spirit could ignite hope even in the darkest times as the sun set. Casting golden light over the scarred plains, Dane gathered the remaining soldiers and looked at them one by one. They were battered but unbroken, weary but triumphant. And above all, they were human. The war was over, but the bond they had formed with the Vayrons, and the example they had set for the universe would never fade. Humanity had fallen from the sky, and in doing so had risen to become more than warriors. They had become symbols of hope, courage, and the unstoppable force that the galaxy would remember, forever, humanity ascendant. The battlefield lay in silence as if the universe itself had paused to witness what was about to unfold. The humans stood at the edge of devastation. Their armor scorched their faces, streaked with soot and blood, but their eyes burned with a fire that no war could extinguish. Commander Dane raised his hand, and the soldiers around him straightened, a ripple of determination passing through the ranks. The Vayrons watched in awe at the sight of beings who had faced annihilation, without fear, and who now stood ready to decide the fate of a galaxy that had underestimated them for far too long. The enemy gathered for one last desperate strike, a wave of creatures and war machines moving in unison with the arrogance of numbers on their side, but humanity did not flinch. Not a single soldier faltered, every mind, focused, every muscle coiled, ready to act with lethal precision. Dane led the charge, stepping forward into the heart of the advancing horde. The ground, trembling, under the weight of so much fury, explosions erupted around them. But the humans moved through the chaos with a rhythm born of experience and instinct. Their weapons sang death and hope, together their bullets and energy blasts cutting paths through the enemy lines. The Vayrons followed the humans, inspired, learning, and fighting with a courage that matched the legends they had only heard in whispered tales. Hours passed like minutes as the fight raged on. Every human soldier became a storm of movement and strategy, turning desperation into victory with every strike. The warlord commanders, massive beings of fury and hatred, could not comprehend the coordination, the ferocity, and the indomitable will of their opponents. Dane confronted the leader of the enemy, a towering figure with claws of blackened steel and eyes that burned with malice. The clash shook the earth, and the air hummed with the power of their blows. Every movement from Dane was deliberate, calculated, and unstoppable. The humans were not fighting for conquest or revenge, but for survival, for freedom for every life that depended on them. Finally, the warlord fell, the earth shuddering as if releasing a burden that had weighed for centuries. The enemy ranks broke into chaos, fleeing or surrendering as humanity advanced, unrelenting. The Vayrons cried out in relief, their hearts swelling with gratitude and disbelief. They had watched extinction approach and had witnessed beings who had arrived as strangers become their saviors. The humans did not celebrate with arrogance, but with quiet strength, tending to the wounded, securing the perimeter, and ensuring that no enemy could rise again. Dane surveyed the battlefield, a panorama of destruction and triumph. The air was thick with smoke, the ground scarred, and yet amidst the devastation, the symbol of humanity's resilience shone brighter than any sun. Humans had fallen from the sky to bring hope, where none remained, to show that courage, unity, and determination could alter the course of history. They had endured pain and loss, yet stood unbroken. The Vayrons approached, offering their thanks and pledging alliance, the bonds forged in battle stronger than any chain or oath. As the twin suns dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the plains, Dane looked to his soldiers and spoke not of victory, but of the future. A future where humanity would remain vigilant, where courage would be honored, and where hope would never again be extinguished. Their legend would travel across star systems, whispered in awe and admiration and etched into the chronicles of every civilization that had doubted them. Humanity had fallen from the sky and risen as the unstoppable force the galaxy had never imagined. The war was over, but the spirit of Earth's warriors would endure in every life they had saved and every soul they had inspired. The humans turned toward the stars, their silhouettes framed against the fading light. A reminder to the universe that strength was not measured by size or numbers, but by courage, resolve, and unity. They had fought for the hopeless and triumphed over impossible odds. They had shown that even in the darkest hour, the spark of humanity could ignite a blaze that no enemy could snuff out. The end,